Good morning, everyone. Someone said to me earlier, it's such a short homily today, Father. Is it going to be a short gospel today? Is it going to be a short homily too? And I was like, no, that's not how that works. You've got, it has to be longer now so that we end at the right time, at the end. No, this weekend, Jesus speaks to us in the gospel in the first and second reading about this thing that I think, we all kind of know, but we need to be reminded of it because it's the opposite of what the culture says to us. And when we just keep getting badgered and, hearing another narrative, we need to be reminded of this. And that is that by following God's law, we're not getting more restricted. We're not, our ability to be free and flourishing isn't being hindered. It's the opposite. By following God's law, we are becoming more free. That when we follow God's commandments, His law that He lays down, it actually makes life come more alive inside of us. He says in the gospel, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them." And Thomas Aquinas says that he means that, when he says, I know them, he means he has a love and affection for each individual, each one of us, for you and for me. That he knows what's going on in our life. We hear and we recognize his voice, and he likewise sees and recognizes us in our particular place. And then he says, and they follow me, so they obey me, is what he's saying. And then what's the result of that? So by us obeying God, what happens? I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. That by us being obedient, it's not that our life gets less free. It's that our life becomes more of what it's supposed to be. Freedom increases. Flourishing increases. I tell my students up at the school, it's like how, when as parents, we lay down rules and laws for the kids. And sometimes kids look at those rules and laws and they see in them something restrictive, right? Like, no, you're only 3 years old, you can't climb up on the counter. You can't touch the knives. The knives are off limits. And then in the kids' mind often, it feels like that is limiting their potential to be who they want to be and who they think, would make them more themselves, like to be free to touch the knives, Wow, this rule is so mean, and it makes my life so difficult, and I'm being, boxed in by my parents, and this is such a bad rule. Of course, what's the spirit behind the rule? What's the real purpose? Actually, the child's real flourishing. That by preventing them from touching the knife or playing with the knives, we are keeping them from, cutting off a finger or something like this, which would limit their freedom and make them less who they're supposed to be. Make life be less for them. You can't cross the street by yourself, You always need an adult with you. Well, that seems so restrictive when we're young. Wow, you're boxing me in. Wow, you're limiting my freedom. You're keeping me from being able to be my full potential, running out into the world. And yet, what's behind that law, that rule for mom and dad? Actually, your greater flourishing, because I want to make sure you don't get struck by a car. And oftentimes when we're younger, we don't see these things. And then as we grow, though, we come to see that even though we didn't understand it when we were younger, there was a logic. And today Jesus is saying to us, when you follow my law always is going to lead to your greater flourishing. And how often do we start to buy into the lie? I feel like I'm seeing this all the time this week because of the leak out of the Supreme Court with the Roe versus Wade case. Everything out there on the internet right now is about the same old mantra. Oh, Catholics, they're so restrictive. They're always telling us what to do, how to live. Just let me be free. Let me live the life the way I want to, you know? And that the Catholics are, you know, I've heard Father Waltz say this like a month ago too, like the stereotype of the Catholic, you know, world being, oh, it's just all a bunch of rules and regulations. And what's that insinuating? That they're repressive and they're keeping me from being the full, flourishing human being I want to be and I could be. But in fact, it's the opposite. That by making the sacrifices to follow that law now, it actually leads to greater freedom. That when the child is obedient and accepts and trusts that mom and dad actually love him, and that he can trust their rule even if he doesn't fully understand it, what does it lead to? Greater flourishing. You can only have, you know, a half hour of screen time every night, or 45 minutes of screen time every night. Oh, that feels so repressive. You know, I want to have way more screen time. All my friends get to have way more, blah, 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 everything else, you know. And so it's a sacrifice now. But what ends up happening if I don't have that kind of, you know, rule when I'm young, if I don't have that kind of law that I'm learning to be obedient to, what happens when I become an adult? I find out I'm actually less free. Because now I'm actually enslaved to technology. And it controls me. And I can't stop when I'm looking at it. So I want to put down the screen and I can't. Because I wasn't following the rule that didn't make sense to me when I was younger, but actually was geared towards me learning the habit I need to be free. What if, and actually this is the case, every one of God's laws is like that? Even the ones that don't make full sense. You know, the typical ones of today would be like the church's, you know, what we say God teaches us, God's law with regard to same-sex marriage or contraception or abortion or going to Mass every Sunday, the need to go to Mass every Sunday, or to go to confession regularly. I might sit here and say, you know, wow, that law seems like a nuisance, you know? I don't want to stop what I'm doing on Sunday when I'm on vacation in the middle of the summer and pick up and go to Mass. That seems like it's a law that's restricting me and restricting my true flourishing and my true joy and my true happiness. But what if it's actually that God, as the adult in the picture, the parent in the picture, sees what really will lead to life, being spiritually fed, that actually we need Mass every Sunday in order to become the true flourishing human beings that he called us to be, that he made us to be. I'm thinking about this a lot this week because of all the stuff I'm reading right now about the Supreme Court thing, and how cool is that actually? You know, like, this is sad, I think I had kind of begun to almost lose hope that we might ever live in a world, in a country, where there was not a mandate to have abortion in every state. Because that's what Roe versus Wade is. It's just the mandate saying there must be abortion allowed up to the point of viability everywhere in the U.S. And how amazing, like, you know, there's so much bad news out there, right? And for us to be at this moment right now where there's a real chance that within like the next month or so, we could be living in a country where we're not required to offer abortions, which of course, God's law. What's going on with God's law there? God's not disregarding the fact that so many of us, or so many people who find themselves in a position where they're contemplating abortion are in a very, very hard spot, like legitimately. And that their life could be potentially very difficult. And that actually, what is that calling of us? That we continue to strive for greater love and holiness in our own life so that we can be the conduit of God's love to people in that situation. but that the answer to a difficult situation is never doing something intrinsically evil like murder. And so what a great gift that we might be at this point right now where that may no longer be mandated in our world. What is Jesus asking of us today? I think to make kind of a twofold prayer. One, that if there's any elements of his law that don't make sense to us, that through his grace, light might be shined into our hearts and minds so that we can see better what he sees. That if the church's teaching and Jesus' teaching on contraception seems wrong and repressive to me, that he might shine a light somehow, maybe through finding some resource or through talking to the right person, Lord, bring the right person into my life to illuminate what the rationale is behind your teaching with regard to whatever the issue is that I'm struggling with. So that'd be one thing, to pray for a greater light of understanding on why some of God's, trickier laws that don't make as much sense to me, why he has them. And then secondly, to say the prayer that we would pray, all of our children would, pray, that the Lord lift from our heart any kind of obstinacy against him and against his law. That if there's something in me that just doesn't want to bend, that he lift that so that I can be freely and fully obedient. Not in obedience that leads to greater repressiveness in my life. No, the opposite of what always happens whenever we follow God's law, a greater freedom through that obedience. And Jesus, too, we also ask you to bless those members of the Supreme Court, give them courage and perseverance, and bless our country that this truly good thing might come about in the next month.